Hi guys, welcome back to the Forgetful Scholar, and this week we're going to chat about books. 2 books, 1.5 book, one and sort of a book. I'll explain. So, this week is contemporary cozy mystery and historical romance. So, let me do the sort of, not really. I guess this book is a DNF. It's the mystery, the Museum Mystery, an Epiphany Bloom Mystery Book 2 by Gayle. And Gayle is 2 independent authors together. And if you're like, oh, that sounds familiar. Yeah, it turns out I read this book before. I had no idea. I started reading, I was like, oh, I'm so bored. I don't like Pip. Oh, come on, Pip, get better. And then I was like, wait, this is Julia Roberts' dress? Wait a minute. Did I read another book like this? So I did a little bit of digging, and it turns out I read this exact book. So I was like, oh, okay. Close it, DNF it. So that's interesting. And I read a fair amount of books, in a year's time. Usually reading of the synopsis triggers a bell. Like, oh yeah, I read this before. Oh yeah, I totally read this before. I think it's kind of upsetting that I didn't remember reading this at all, until the Julia Roberts dress part came up with her sister, and I was like, oh yeah, wait a minute, did I read a different book? Oh man, that's not good, because you don't, my art school teacher, ages ago, the dark ages, darling, that the death keel of art is for it to be forgettable. So, oops. And I try to be I do give self-published authors a lot more grace, and I'm harder on the traditionally published authors because they have a whole team, a whole building behind them, you know what I mean? Whole company behind them. Independent writers, not so much. So I try to give them a lot more leeway. I know I didn't particularly like the Epiphany Bloom book 1 that I read. I can't believe I completely forgot the second one. That's it's what, I tried it again because when I picked it up, I was like, oh, this is the second one. I know I didn't really like the first one. I didn't really like Pip, but maybe it's like the pilot of a TV show, and just because I usually with a new show I try to give it the pilot and the next episode, because sometimes the pilot's nothing like the second episode, right? So I kind of did that, and going into it, I was like, oh, I just really don't like Pip. I don't like her personality. I don't really get her humor. Oh, she has a crush on her roommate, but not really, because she's hot for every guy she meets. And I'm like, in 20 pages, like, girl, buy a toy. Get a toy. Because this is too much. You were attracted to, I get it. You're surrounded by apparently the hottest men in England, all convene around you, but a little self-control, a little bit, just a little bit, because it makes it feel like the crush on the roommate is he's just another one in a long list of guys she finds hot, so it's not really, doesn't feel special. And man, I like the Julia Bird series these authors do. I like that a lot. Kind of makes me think of Murder, She Wrote mixed with Midsummer Murders, and both shows I love. So I like that series a lot. I think I just don't get the humor of Pip. So for me, because there is a lot of humor, a lot of Pip's humor in this, for me, since I don't get the humor, it doesn't click, doesn't jive. So I will continue the Julia Bird series, but I think the Epiphany Bloom is done for me. I can't believe I couldn't remember it. That's ridiculous. Anyway, so that one, I believe I gave it 2 stars when I first read it. Technically, it's a DNF for this one because I was like, oh, bitch, I read it. So, there we go. The historical romance, How to Marry a Marquis, The Agents of the Crown, Book 2 by Julia Quin. Now, this was published 1999 and 375 pages. Now, this book, I freaking loved. I loved it. It's a 4.5. It was so close to being a 5. Up until the 3rd act, I was like, oh, this is a 5. Oh, I love it. I love it so much. This is so great. And then the 3rd act happened, and I was like, oh, Okay, okay, not a 5, but more than a 4. So 4.5. There we go. That's how I got that. More than a 4, less than a 5, 4.5. Okay. Now this book follows Elizabeth and James. So Elizabeth, first chapter she was in, I was like, I love her. She could do no wrong. I'll fight anybody says otherwise. So this is the 1800s, and Elizabeth, their parents have passed away. And she has 3 younger siblings, Susan, who's 14, Jane, who's 9, and little Lucas, who's 8. And she was like, I'm going to raise them. I'm going to make it work. You know, I'm not giving my brother away, because there's a lot of distant relatives that wanted Lucas, and just Lucas, not the sisters, just Lucas, because he has a title of a baron. So when he gets older, he'll be a baronet and everything like that. So, which is completely how it used to be and completely messed up, right? Right. And I just adored her so much, because she's trying to get, because they have no money left, right? And she works as a companion for Lady Danbury, who I also love. Give me a feisty old lady and I'll eat it up, you know what I mean? So she works as a companion, and it's sort of enough to scrape by, but not enough to send the Lucas to Eton, which every member of the male members of the family have always gone to Eton, so that's pretty tough. At one scene you see her like not eat her breakfast so they could eat, and she's like, oh no, I'll eat with Lady Danbury, you know, don't worry about me, eat, you know. So she kind of goes without eating so they can. So I'm like, oh, I love you, Elizabeth, and I hope everything good happens, you know. And Julie Quinn does sibling relationships really well, because you could feel their connection. You could feel that they're siblings and they're all like in this together, you know, and it felt very organic and very real. And little Lucas is like, you know, Jane's like, hey, you've been saving up for years. We should give it to Elizabeth, you know, and he's like, you're right. A little 8-year-old's like, I'm the man of the family. I need to provide for the family. So he comes out and it's all pennies, and he saved like $1.50, and he gives it to his sister, and he won't take it back. And it's such cute. Like, it got me a little, I was like, oh my god, it's so cute, you know? So Lady Danbury, she's 66, even though she keeps saying like, I'm 74, I'm 82. And Elizabeth are like, no, you're 66. She's hysterical. I adore her. And the whole time I was like, you crafty old lady. Because I thought, because James is Lady Danbury's nephew, right? So I was like, this is a little too coincidental. You're trying to set them up, aren't you? Yep. And while Elizabeth is, you know, at work, in the library, she finds books as How to Marry a Marquis. And she's, you know, at this point, she's really desperate for money, and she doesn't know what to do, and she's at her wit's end, right? So she's like, oh, it can't hurt to borrow and just look through it, right? That shouldn't be a problem. So she takes it home, and her Susan, who's 14, like teases her mercilessly about it, but is also really excited about it. And Susan takes the book, reads it all, and then like is like schooling, teaching Elizabeth what to do. You know what I mean? And while that is happening, James gets a message from his aunt who raised him to come to her estate immediately, right? Turns out she's being blackmailed, and she needs help, you know? So he poses as the estate manager to figure out who's the blackmailer, right? And at first he thought maybe Elizabeth, because she's the aunt's companion for 5 years. She had run of the house. Later on, he finds out that she's in dire straits of money, things like that, right? And what I really liked about this book is that James gets in his own way so much. And usually it's the heroine, the female lead of the book in these romance novels that just shoots themselves in the foot, like makes problems for themselves. So I liked it that it was James, right? And I guess this must be one of my favorite tropes, because this reminded me of Gentle Rogue, I think? Yes, Gentle Rogue, I believe. Where Anthony Mallory agrees to help Rosalind find a husband, because she needs to find a husband, even though he wants her for himself. So in this book, James like says, oh, I'll help you catch a husband, even though he like hates the idea and doesn't want her with anybody else, right? But it took him so long to realize like, oh, I should marry her. And I kind of like that, like, she got to know James and fell in love with James when she thought he was just an estate manager, and she's brokenhearted because her family needs money, but she loves him. She's like, oh, I knew I would have to marry without love, but it hurts, because for James, he's always been his title. So like people really wanted him for his title. So I could understand why he held off so long telling her the truth. Like I get it, but also I'm like, oh, James, you're shooting yourself in the foot. You're making your own problems worse. Which he does. So, and there's wonderful, like, yearning romantic moments between them. And you guys know I love the yearn. I love it. I eat it up. I eat it up. But there are some great yearning moments. And there's a masquerade ball planned. I was like, oh, he's going to come. I thought one thing about the masquerade, but that didn't happen. I was pleasantly surprised. Now, where it started, like, losing points for me, because in the Ages of the Crown book 1, the characters there make an appearance because they're James's friends. That makes sense, right? And Caroline, I liked her in her book, but in this book, she was annoying. I was like, shut up. Please shut up. She kind of blows the secret of who James really is, not on purpose, because say what, as annoying as she got, Caroline's not a mean person, and like Elizabeth is furious, and the thing is, Elizabeth jumps to the worst case scenario why he did this, which is in line with her personality throughout the whole book. The whole book up until this point, and this is like the third act conflict, whatever. She always kind of assumed things, like she gets a little bit of like evidence and then assumes the worst, So it was perfectly aligned. Like I got annoyed, but it was perfectly aligned, and that isn't the part that made it go down a half a point. It's just the point that made it go half. This is an issue with Julia Quinn. Banter is really good. I think she does really well with dialogue and banter, but sometimes it goes on too long. Like, just too long. And I feel like she loves her own banter a little too much, There was too much going on in certain scenes when, like, she's confronting him, she's mad, he's furious, and the banter between his two friends, like, taking over the scene was a little too much. The next day, because like he had these plans, the day after the masquerade, he was going to invite Lucas to fish because they both fish, and I love how much time he took into getting to know her younger siblings. That was so sweet, I really like that. Again, I love that, right? So he was going to take Lucas to fish and then ask Lucas for permission to marry Elizabeth, and like he knew like Lucas doesn't really have a say, but he thought like Lucas would appreciate it and like Elizabeth would appreciate it, and how cute is that, right? For the masquerade ball, Carolyn lets the secret go and then doesn't leave them alone. That's the thing that got me. I was like, just leave, let them deal with the fallout. But she's still there, and her husband, James' friend, comes in, and they're still in the situation, and they're kind of mocking the situation, and they keep interrupting the main characters, which I was like, this is not going to get resolved because you two won't shut up. Even when he threatened to throw them out the window, they wouldn't shut up. And like, he's at the point, like, he's so furious, right? And I was just like, oh, come on. Like, this was a 5-star until this point. Until this point, I was like, enough. Like, that, you lost half a point with me. Come on, this book was so good. Because it just went on too long. You know what I mean? Like, way too long. And then the next day, the friends show up at her cottage to try to talk to her. So does Lady Danbury. She quits on Lady Danbury, and all this stuff happens. Like, he anonymously made it so a banknote was given to them so Lucas can go to Eden, and she doesn't, money. Anonymously gave them money so she doesn't have to marry for money, and Lucas can go to Eden. And she's like, their siblings are so excited. She's like, no, we can't, la la. And at this point, I was like, because the whole book, Elizabeth has been putting aside her pride for her family. And I really admired that about her. But at this point, just to make conflict, she was like, no, like a different person. Like, her pride was the most important thing. And I was like, wow, that's like a different person. Because the whole book, she was about her siblings, and then all of a sudden this could save everything, and she's like, absolutely not. I get it. She thought it was from pity because, again, she just jumped to conclusions. And even the friend was like, no, it's not from pity. It's so you don't feel like you had to marry someone, you know? So I like that Caroline was like, no, you're wrong. And then I did appreciate James, like, calling her out on it. And was like, no, you're being selfish. And she's like, how dare you? He's like, but you are, you know? Exactly what the readers, at least what I felt. Like, all of a sudden she was being selfish. And I was like, damn, your pride's not more important than your siblings getting breakfast. You know what I mean? So I was like, what the hell? And then, you know, they're in her little cabin and there's so many voices going at once. And I get it's supposed to be a funny, lighthearted scene, but I was just like, this is just irritating. Everyone's making things worse, you know? And it didn't get resolved then. I really do feel like if they weren't, like, so I didn't know what the hell that scene was all about, right? It really was ridiculous. It was everyone telling Elizabeth she's wrong, and she's like, no, I'm not, blah. And then nothing got resolved, and she's basically laying in bed for 3 days crying. I was happy that James called her selfish because she was being selfish in that moment, and very different personality from what we've seen so far. So that was weird. And her family and his family set them up to meet in the cabin, and then by themselves. Who would have thought they would resolve everything by themselves? Oh my gosh, right? And it turns out Lady Danbury was setting them both up. You know, she wasn't being black, you know, like she was setting everything up for them to be together, which I was like, Lady Danbury. So funny, so cute. So yes, it has a great happy ending because it is a romance, and romance have happy endings. It's just the third act conflict. Yeah, I knew that was going to be, like, his real identity was going to be the conflict, right? But just the chaotic mess that just invaded the book for that part, I was like, what the hell is happening? This is such a great story until this. Like, this too much. Like, I get it, like, if you wanted to sprinkle in some humor, cool, you love your banter, I get it, you're good at it, but sometimes you need to pull back a little bit, because I'm like trying to remember all the things I really liked about this book, and I can remember how annoying the last 100 pages were with everybody just blah, you know, just, they wouldn't shut up, blah, you know. There's one part, I should warn you guys, like a little bit of a trigger warning. There is attempted SA, but don't worry, there is no SA. The hero comes in the nick of time. I was kind of like, the next day she shouldn't have been fine, right? But the next day she was fine, and I was like, a little bit, I was like, like her breakdown after it happened made sense. The next day I didn't think she would just be like perfectly fine, right? Like, that's not really. But I was like, okay, when I first read that, I was like, okay, don't make a big deal out of it. You still really enjoyed everything up to this point, you know. And I will say page 250 got me in the feels, got me in the emotions. Like, they bonded so much, and they told each other secrets they never told anybody. And I was like, oh my gosh, look at that. My dark, cold, dead heart is pounding. This is so cute. So again, so close to 5 stars. I wish that, like, her editors were like, hey, I know banter's your thing, but maybe, you know, cut 2 pages off of it where it's just bantering nonsense. It had nothing to do with the plot. Nothing to do with the plot. You know what I mean? And the scene at her cabin had nothing to do with the plot. Nothing. It was just, I guess, supposed to be funny. It just came off obnoxious. Again, humor's subjective, but I was like, oh, they just need to be by themselves. And when they were by themselves, they fixed it. You know what I mean? So, there we go. So, this week was a weird one. Started reading a book. I already read, didn't realize it. And really, really freaking enjoyed this Julie Quinn book. Like, a lot. So close to a 5 stars. Oh, so close. So, yeah. And next week, I'm saying this because I usually don't say this because I am a mood reader, so I don't usually say I'm going to read books just in case I don't. But I have 2 horror books loaded up in my Kindle that I wanted to read for the week of Halloween. You guys know I'm a baby bitch when it comes to horror, but I want to give them a try. One is Jordan L. Hawk's Fever, and we love Jordan L. Hawk. I'm nervous because their romances, there's a big creep factor in them. So I'm like, oh man, if they're going like full-blown horrors, oh boy. And I can't put my Kindle in the freezer. You know? How am I supposed to kill the demons? And the other one is a new author. It looks like a weird Western horror, so that could be fun. I'm saying this so I'd actually not back out and read them because I haven't even started and I'm already so scared. Okay. I don't want to, but it's time for me to get back to the real world. Like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you later. Bye.